So we know Jon Moxley is the AEW champion now, but eventually he'll lose it. Who will he lose it to? Kenny Omega or MJF? We discuss it next on the Squared Circle Psychobabble. Ralph, quick little discussion here. Who should be the next AEW champion? Who will be the next AEW champion? Ralph, who do you think should be the next AEW champion?
Definitely think MJF should be the next AEW champion. I think he should be the guy to take the title off of Moxley. I think this should happen at All Out. And I think that they should really strike while the iron is hot right now with MJF, who is one of the most has the most promising future as far as anybody in the professional wrestling right now. So when you talk about MJF and you talk about Kenny Omega, the two things that I think about are this. Kenny Omega, to me, is a guy who has done quite a bit outside of the United States. He'd had a great run in Japan, both as, a face or even as a heel while he was the leader of the Bullet Club, all of that type of stuff. Some of that carried over to the United States. Obviously, he's going to have his critics, which we've talked about before in the past, but he's mostly established to a good majority of the professional wrestling fan base. So I don't think he necessarily needs a win or needs to carry the title to be Kenny Omega or even to be the cleaner. Like if he wanted to turn heel and he wanted to be the cleaner tomorrow or next week on Dynamite, they could do that and people would embrace it and it would be a big thing. With MJF, yes, he could still be MJF if he loses to Moxley, but I think the main thing with this is right now, he's up and coming. He has a lot of momentum after a couple of weeks ago on Dynamite where he cut that epic promo that we've talked about. I think a lot of people are going to look back on that as one of the bigger moments in professional wrestling history, especially if AEW continues to grow and sticks around for quite some time. That is going to be a huge moment for him. I don't want to see him lose that momentum by going into a match against a guy like Jon Moxley and losing. Yes, he doesn't necessarily need the title, but why not strike while the iron is hot? Moxley will still be Moxley. It's not like he's going to lose anything from that. Kenny Omega will still be Kenny Omega. But to me, if you have MJF go out there and lose to a guy like Moxley, it's almost like, well, what's the point of that? It doesn't do much for him. Not only that, but when you consider who has held the title so far to this point, you got Jericho, former WWE talent. You got Moxley, former WWE talent. So this will really be their chance to crown a new guy who isn't even necessarily associated with WWE. So even that comment that people like to say, oh, well, they're just putting former WWE guys in prominent roles. Well, here you go. Here's MJF. Here's one of the brightest up and comers in the industry. He's the head of our company right now. And that's the direction I think they should go in.
I'm glad you brought that up because I actually have a story for the reign of MJF if he ends up taking the title off of Jon Moxley. During his run as AEW champion, he should just face anybody with WWE experience and beat them all, or at least close to them all. I'm talking, have a rematch with Moxley, beat Jericho, beat Dustin Rhodes, beat Cody Rhodes again. Even go with like Lance Archer, Trent Beretta, anybody with WWE experience. Because I think what the lost art of the champion is, especially because it hasn't really been accustomed that way in WWE, is that the champion should be the representative of the brand, of the promotion. So the one thing that AEW promised us or tried to tell us that it was going to be this WWE alternative. We're going to bring in new stars. What better way to do that by having this guy who is unknown at the time beating all these guys that you would know from being in WWE. Have him have that long reign. He could talk, so any promotion that he does or any promo that he does, will be good. Any feud that he does will most likely be good. So that's where I say go. Just go down the line of every single former WWE talent. And you could, by doing that, you can have him have the title for easily over a year, without a doubt. Now, I know there's some people out there that, and the reason why this conversation even started was because we put a poll up asking who's going to be the AEW champion, Moxley or MJF after All Out. And I saw many, many comments on that poll saying it's going to be Kenny Omega at Full Gear because of the story that they had at last year's Full Gear. So complete circle on that. So I could totally see that happening. And you could kind of do the same story with Kenny Omega too, where he beats all the former WWE talent and he has all these great matches. I don't think his promo is as good as MJF, but you could certainly do that with either one of these guys. Just have them have a run with all the former WWE talent. Does it kind of bury them? I don't think so, but you might get that thrown around if you do.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about people saying that it's burying the talent. I mean, if anything, I think a majority of the AEW fan base would be open to that, seeing that they're former WWE guys. I know that Cody certainly catches a lot of criticism for going out there and having matches and more or less burying talent, as some people would put it, because he's going over a lot of these young guys, a lot of these up and comers. But the main thing with this is you have to understand a guy like Moxley is going to draw because of his time in the WWE.
Right.
It's just because he's more established. More people have seen him. More people know who he is. Even if he's not Dean Ambrose, he's Jon Moxley, and you know that he worked in WWE. The same can be said for Zack Ryder. We made the case for that. Cody, any of those guys. So having whether it ends up being Kenny Omega somewhere down the line as the cleaner, as a heel, beating Moxley for the title, or it is MJF, I think that's something that the fans will certainly embrace. The thing that about this is knowing that those guys have done so much outside of AEW, especially Chris Jericho. He's done quite a bit. Cody, not to the extent that Chris Jericho has, because we all know in WWE he was Stardust.
Right.
All of those guys have done a lot outside of AEW. Going with Kenny Omega or going with MJF will really give them that opportunity to show the fan base, look, this is something completely new. It's something completely different. And even if it's MJF, who is certainly younger, which I know this is something you're probably going to bring up, I think that's still the right move, because one of the things people say most about WWE is they book themselves in a corner and they don't strike while the iron's hot.
Mm-hmm.
If right now he has all the momentum and he beats Moxley doesn't lose anything in that, especially because you already know a guy like MJF, they can do something where Wardlow interferes or something to that extent where it's more or less a cheap finish and there's a rematch somewhere down the line. So it's not like Moxley would have to necessarily lose clean. I don't think Moxley loses all that much from either losing to Kenny Omega or losing to MJF. And MJF right now has a ton of momentum.
Right.
Why not go with him?
Right. You're talking about at All Out, the two guys that have been there since the start and have yet to been pinned or submitted since AEW started. So there's going to be some way that they have to protect both Moxley and MJF with that finish. Obviously, Wardlow is the easy way to do that, because you could either have him turn on MJF or you can have him interfere with on Moxley and have MJF win the title. And you kind of have that dynamic that we see on WWE with Bayley and Sasha, where they need each other to retain their titles kind of thing. And then that goes on and on and on. And eventually they split and we get that feud starting. Kenny Omega, obviously that's all dependent on, the fact that he has the most wins. And we talked about this recently where I said that AEW has booked him perfectly. That would be the culmination of it. He does do the heel turn. He has his small feud with Hangman Page. He wins the title from Moxley after he says that, he's won all these matches, but yet never got a chance. Beats Moxley at Full Gear. And then he goes on his run, like I said, do it against all these former WWE guys. And eventually that title goes to Hangman Page, because I think that's where it ends up. I think this is where that all leads to, where it leads to Hangman Page eventually getting that title. The question is, who's he taking it off of? Kenny Omega or MJF? And I think my heart wants to say MJF, because I think he really is the future and the present of professional wrestling. But I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being Kenny Omega. I wouldn't, because of obviously the already established story beforehand and the fact that he's an EVP. That might play a role in it, although I don't think it's that bad. But people will start saying, oh, he's using his power to get titles, like we see with Cody and the whole Triple H experiment and comparisons there. So it's there. So the question is now, who will be the next AEW champion? Will it be MJF after All Out, or will it be Kenny Omega after All Out?
I still think I'm going to go with MJF. I really do think that they're going to go all in on him. No pun intended. I think that he's going to take the title off Moxley. I think he's got too much momentum, too much upside, too much going for him to really squander this moment. I mean, look, and if he ends up winning the title and they decide they want to take the belt off him at some point further down the road, a couple of months, that's fine too. I mean, I think it's worth the risk putting the title on a guy like him, which, as you pointed out, and which everybody knows, he is a strong promo. He can certainly wrestle in the ring. He can go out there and draw heat like nobody else, especially because he really is kind of like a throwback to, the style that's more worked in like the 80s or even prior to that, or the 90s. You're not going to see him go out there and do suicide dives and flips and all that other stuff. And that's fine. But he brings that to the table, and he's going to call that out in his promos too. So he can really get under the skin of the fan base that's there in AEW. Now, the other thing you pointed out, if he were to win the title, well, Kenny Omega can still turn heel and do this whole run on the side for even up to 6 to 8 months where he's feuding with the Elite. He could betray them. He could be the cleaner. He can feud against Adam Hangman Page. And then eventually by that point, maybe you take the belt off of MJF and then you put it on another face, and maybe Kenny Omega goes in a feud against that guy. But I think right now it should be, and it will be MJF for sure.
All right. I definitely think it should be MJF. I got to flip a coin on whether it will be Kenny Omega or MJF, because if history repeats itself like we see, we always see AEW book these guys really, really strong before the big match, and then they end up losing. We saw that with Archer. We saw that with Brody Lee. We saw that with Brian Cage. We even saw that to an extent with Shawn Spears before the match last year at All Out and Cody. So MJF could be getting all this build, and then loses the big match. Now, I hope that's not the case, but it certainly can be the case. But who knows? Yeah. Let us know in the comments who you think should be the next AEW champion, MJF or Kenny Omega, or perhaps somebody else. Don't forget to share us all over social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at SCPB Podcast. And for news, reviews, and conversations on all things pro wrestling, subscribe. Hit that bell for notifications. For Ralph Valenti, my name's Michael Valenti. Thank you for watching the Squared Circle Zygo Babble.